The boardroom fell silent as Charlotte Martinez Webb swept through the mahogany doors like she owned every breath of air in the room. Her designer stilettos clicked against the Italian marble with the confidence of someone who had never earned a single thing in her life. Behind her, a trailing perfume of entitlement and expensive French fragrance lingered in the air. She carried no briefcase, no laptop, no credentials, just a wedding ring that sparkled with the same intensity as her husband's family fortune. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Is that really her? Someone murmured from the corner. The new VP of Strategic Development? Another voice questioned. My pen froze mid-sentence. VP of Strategic Development. My title. The position I'd held for the past 4 years while architecting the most ambitious renewable energy project in corporate history. That morning was supposed to mark the culmination of everything I'd built, the moment when Meridian Energy Solutions would unveil the North American Solar Grid Initiative to Titanium Corp, our largest prospective client, a $2.1 billion contract that would reshape how 3 countries approached sustainable energy. Instead, I found myself watching a stranger walk into my life's work like she was trying on a new dress. The CEO stood up with a practiced smile, the kind that boardroom veterans perfect over decades of delivering news that changes lives. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Charlotte Martinez Webb, our new Vice President of Strategic Development. She'll be leading today's presentation and spearheading our partnership with Titanium Corp moving forward. My blood turned to ice water. No meeting. No transition period. No handshake or acknowledgement that I'd spent the last 1847 days building every component of this project from scratch. Just a casual mention that I would provide supporting documentation during the transition, as if I were a temporary consultant whose contract had simply expired. But this story doesn't end with me quietly packing my office belongings into cardboard boxes, because when someone tries to steal 4 years of your life, 24 patents, and a revolutionary clean energy system that could power half of North America, they better make sure they understand exactly what they're taking. Charlotte Martinez Webb was about to learn that some foundations run deeper than family connections, and some knowledge can't be transferred with a simple email signature. The solar panels outside my window caught the morning light, casting geometric shadows across my desk. Shadows that looked remarkably like the grid patterns I'd been dreaming about since this project began. Those panels represented more than just renewable energy. They represented every midnight calculation, every failed prototype, every small victory that had led to this moment. And now, someone else was going to take credit for all of it. Or so they thought. 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days earlier, I'd walked into Meridian Energy Solutions, carrying nothing but a worn leather messenger bag, and a vision that most people would have called impossible. The company was struggling to compete with the major players in renewable energy, hemorrhaging clients to corporations with deeper pockets and more established reputation. Their solar installations were competent, but unremarkable, the kind of projects that helped homeowners feel good about their carbon footprint, but wouldn't revolutionize anything. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was the only person in that building who saw potential in my proposal. While other executives shuffled through my presentation with polite disinterest, she leaned forward in her chair, her engineering background allowing her to grasp the mathematical elegance of what I was suggesting. A distributed solar grid that could adapt in real time to weather patterns, energy demands, and equipment failures across multiple time zones. Smart panels that could communicate with each other, rerouting power through optimal pathways faster than any human operator could manage. The existing infrastructure can't support this level of integration, the chief financial officer had objected during my third pitch meeting. We're talking about connecting solar installations across 17 states, 3 provinces, and Mexico. The regulatory complexity alone would take decades to navigate. I'd spent 6 months preparing for that exact objection. I pulled out a 3-inch binder containing correspondence with energy commissions, municipal governments, and international trade authorities. Every regulatory hurdle, every bureaucratic requirement, every legal precedent that could impact the project. I'd done my homework not just on the technology, but on the political landscape that would determine whether innovation could actually reach the people who need it. The regulatory framework already exists, I'd explained, flipping to a section marked with dozens of colored tabs. The North American Free Trade Agreement includes provisions for cross-border energy infrastructure. The Clean Energy Act of 2019 established federal preemption for grid-level renewable projects, and the Mexican Energy Reform of 2018 opened their market to exactly this kind of international partnership. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes had lit up as she realized the scope of research I'd conducted. This wasn't just an engineering proposal, it was a comprehensive strategy for reshaping energy distribution across 3 countries. The technology was revolutionary, but the legal and political groundwork made it achievable. That meeting changed everything. Within 2 weeks, I had an office with my name on the door, and a budget that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. More importantly, I had Dr. Rodriguez's trust and the freedom to build something that had never existed before. The first 18 months were a blur of 16-hour days and weekend flights to solar installations across the continent. I needed to understand not just how individual solar farms operated, but how weather patterns, consumer behavior, and grid infrastructure varied from Alberta to Oaxaca. Every region had its own energy personality. California's coastal fog patterns that required different panel configurations than Arizona's relentless sunshine, or the way winter storms in Minnesota created opportunities for massive energy redistribution to warmer climates experiencing peak demand. I established relationships with engineers at 2047 different solar installations, learning the intricate details of how energy moved through existing grid systems. These weren't just professional connections. They were friendships built on shared 3 a.m. troubleshooting calls and mutual respect for the technical challenges we were all trying to solve. Marcus Chen in Vancouver taught me how Canadian regulations differed from U.S. standards. Sofia Guerrero in Guadalajara explained the cultural considerations that could make or break international energy partnerships. James Patterson in Phoenix shared data on thermal efficiency variations that traditional models completely ignore. Each conversation added another layer to my understanding of how a truly integrated solar grid could function. The technology existed. What was missing was someone willing to connect all the pieces into a unified system. Someone who understood not just the engineering but the human factors that would determine success or failure. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging winter in the upper Midwest. A massive storm system had knocked out traditional power sources across Wisconsin and Minnesota, leaving millions of people without electricity during sub-zero temperatures. Meanwhile, solar installations in Nevada and Southern California were generating excess capacity with nowhere to send it. The existing grid infrastructure couldn't efficiently move that surplus energy where it was needed most. I spent 3 sleepless nights developing a routing algorithm that could have solved the crisis if the proper connections had been in place. The math was elegant. Excess capacity from sunny regions could be transmitted through a network of smart relays, automatically rerouted around damaged infrastructure, and delivered to areas experiencing shortages. Instead of treating solar farms as isolated installations, they could function as nodes in an intelligent network that responded to real-time conditions. Dr. Rodriguez found me in the lab at 4:30 a.m., surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and network diagrams. I was running simulations on a modified weather prediction model, testing how the routing algorithm would perform under various crisis scenarios. The preliminary results were remarkable: a 73% improvement in energy distribution efficiency, and an 89% reduction in weather-related outages. How long would it take to build this? She'd asked, studying the projections with the focused intensity that had made her one of the most respected energy engineers in North America. If we had unlimited resources and no regulatory obstacles, 3 years, I'd answered honestly. With realistic constraints and proper testing phases, 5 to 7 years for full implementation. She'd nodded slowly, then asked the question that would define the next phase of my career. What if I told you Titanium Corp has been looking for exactly this kind of system? They're planning a massive expansion of their manufacturing operations across North America, and they need an energy partner who can guarantee reliable power in any location, regardless of local infrastructure limitations. Titanium Corp wasn't just another potential client. They were the kind of industrial partner that could validate an entire technology sector. Their manufacturing facilities required enormous amounts of energy, but their commitment to sustainability meant they were actively seeking alternatives to traditional power sources. More importantly, their operations spanned exactly the geographic range where my solar grid would be most effective. The partnership discussions began immediately. Titanium's chief technology officer, Rebecca Walsh, flew in from Detroit for a presentation that I'd been preparing for my entire career. Not just the technical specifications, but the economic projections, environmental impact assessments, and implementation timeline that would turn a revolutionary concept into practical reality. Traditional solar installations treat each facility as an independent system. I'd explained, using a laser pointer to highlight connections on a continent-spanning map. What we're proposing is a true network installations that communicate with each other, share resources and adapt to changing conditions in real time. When one region experiences peak demand, the system automatically routes excess capacity from areas with surplus generation. Rebecca had interrupted with the kind of technical question that separated serious engineers from corporate executives reading prepared talking points. How do you handle transmission losses over those distances? The efficiency degradation alone would offset most of the benefit. I'd smiled because I'd spent 8 months solving exactly that problem. Superconducting transmission lines for the primary interstate connections, combined with localized battery storage at each node. The routing algorithm prioritizes shorter transmission distances whenever possible, but the infrastructure exists to move power cross-continent when necessary. We're not just building a solar network, we're building the most efficient energy distribution system ever created. The room had fallen silent as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about renewable energy, it was about energy security, reliability and independence on a scale that traditional utilities couldn't match. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 3 weeks later, Titanium Corp signed a letter of intent for a $2.1 billion partnership that would span 15 years and cover their energy needs across 107 manufacturing facilities. The contract included provisions for expanding the network to include other industrial partners, potentially creating a revolution in how North American businesses approached energy infrastructure. I'd spent the following months assembling a team of specialists who shared my vision for what energy distribution could become. Dr. Kevin Thompson, a transmission engineer who'd designed grid systems for 3 different countries. Patricia Liu, a software architect whose algorithms could optimize power routing faster than existing systems could detect problems. Miguel Santos, a regulatory specialist who understood the international legal framework better than most government officials. Together, we'd created something unprecedented. A solar energy network that could adapt to any challenge, distribute power more efficiently than traditional systems, and scale to meet the energy needs of an entire continent. The technology was proven, the partnerships were established, and the implementation plan was ready for execution. That's why Charlotte Martinez Webb's arrival felt like watching someone walk into a cathedral and announce they were redecorating. 4 years of technical innovation, relationship building, and strategic planning had created something extraordinary. Now someone with no engineering background, no industry experience, and no understanding of the complexities involved, was preparing to present my life's work as her own achievement. But complex systems have ways of protecting themselves from people who don't understand how they function. And Charlotte was about to discover that solar grids, like trust, can't be transferred through family connections and polite boardroom announcements. The foundation I'd built ran deeper than org charts and executive decisions. It was embedded in every calculation, every partnership, and every line of code that made the North American Solar Grid Initiative possible. Some things can't be stolen because they can't be separated from the person who created them. Charlotte Martinez Webb was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The first sign something was wrong came 3 days before the Titanium Corp presentation, buried in what looked like a routine schedule adjustment email. The subject line read, "Updated Meeting Protocol, Executive Leadership Change," and arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, timed perfectly to avoid immediate questions or phone calls. I was working late in the lab, fine-tuning the final energy distribution models when my phone buzzed with the notification. The sender was someone I'd never heard of. Amanda Fletcher from Executive Communications, a department that hadn't existed the previous month. The message was corporate speak wrapped in bureaucratic politeness, the kind of language that says nothing while changing everything. Effective immediately, all Titanium Corp communications will be channeled through our new strategic development leadership team to ensure consistent messaging and unified corporate representation. The email began. My access to the shared Titanium project files had been transferred to someone with the initials CMW. My calendar invitations for the remaining prep meetings had been cancelled without replacement. Most tellingly, my name had been removed from the presentation materials and replaced with Strategic Development Team in generic corporate font. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, reading and rereading each line, hoping I'd misunderstood something fundamental. But the message was clear. I was being systematically removed from the project I'd built from nothing, not demoted or reassigned, erased, as if 4 years of work could be digitally deleted with a few mouse clicks. The timing was surgical in its cruelty. Too late to object or seek clarification before the presentation, but early enough to complete the transition without my input. Someone had planned this carefully, waiting until the project was ready for public unveiling, before cutting out the person who'd made it possible. I tried calling Dr. Rodriguez, but her office line went straight to voicemail with a message I'd never heard before. Currently in strategic planning sessions, please direct all project-related inquiries to the Strategic Development Office. Even she had been isolated from whatever was happening. Sleep was impossible that night. I spent hours walking through the empty office building, past conference rooms where I'd fought for budget allocations, past the lab where I'd solved the transmission efficiency problem, past my own office door with my nameplate that now felt like a historical artifact from someone else's career. The next morning brought Charlotte Martinez Webb. She arrived 45 minutes late to the 8 a.m. all-hands meeting, extending the kind of casual disregard for schedules that only comes from a lifetime of knowing other people will wait. Her entrance interrupted CEO Richard Steinberg mid-sentence, as he discussed quarterly performance metrics. But instead of apologizing, she smiled and waved like she was greeting friends at a garden party. Sorry, traffic was absolutely brutal, she announced to the room, though anyone familiar with the city knew the commute from the upscale Riverside district took 12 minutes at that hour. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most engineers earned in a month, and her jewelry caught the conference room lights with each gesture. Richard's expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, a mixture of indulgence and nervous deference that suggested this wasn't just an employee arriving late. This was family, or more precisely, family by marriage, which in corporate dynasties often carries more weight than actual competence. Charlotte, perfect timing, he said, though she'd missed the first 20 minutes of the meeting. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Charlotte Martinez Webb, who'll be taking over leadership of our strategic development initiatives. Charlotte brings fresh perspective and innovative thinking to our energy solutions portfolio. Fresh perspective. The phrase hit like a slap. 4 years of technical expertise, international partnerships, and revolutionary engineering, reduced to a euphemism for nepotism. I glanced around the room, looking for any acknowledgement of the absurdity, but found only carefully neutral expressions and averted eyes. Everyone understood exactly what was happening, but corporate survival instincts prevented anyone from saying it aloud. Charlotte beamed with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, she said, her voice carrying the slight breathiness of someone unaccustomed to public speaking, but determined to sound authoritative. I've been reviewing our renewable energy portfolio, and I see tremendous opportunities for growth and innovation. Reviewing our renewable energy portfolio. She'd been in the building for less than a week, but spoke as if she'd been studying energy systems for years. The casual appropriation of expertise she'd never earned was breathtaking in its audacity. Charlotte will be presenting our North American solar grid initiative to Titanium Corp tomorrow, Richard continued, and I felt something cold and sharp twist in my stomach. This represents a tremendous opportunity for Meridian Energy Solutions to establish ourselves as leaders in next-generation renewable technology. Our North American Solar Grid Initiative. The possessive pronoun felt like theft occurring in real time. 4 years of my life became our with a single sentence, as if innovation were a team sport where credit could be redistributed based on family connections rather than actual contribution. I raised my hand slowly, hoping my voice would remain steady. Richard, I'd like to discuss the technical specifications that will be covered in tomorrow's presentation. There are some complex regulatory considerations that Alina, thank you for your concern, he interrupted with the patronizing tone reserved for employees being managed out of important conversations. Charlotte has been fully briefed on all aspects of the project. I'm confident she'll represent our capabilities excellently. Fully briefed. As if 4 years of technical development could be summarized in a briefing document. As if the mathematical models I'd developed, the international partnerships I'd cultivated, and the regulatory frameworks I'd navigated could be transferred through a PowerPoint presentation in a firm handshake. Charlotte's smile widened, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of something calculating behind her cheerful facade. She knew exactly what she was taking, and she was enjoying the process of taking it. Alina's done wonderful foundational work, Charlotte said, her tone dripping with the kind of condescension that sounds like praise to people not paying attention. I'm excited to build on that foundation and take the project to the next level. Foundational work. 4 years of innovation reduced to a foundation for someone else's success. The implication was clear. I'd done the preliminary research, but now it was time for real leadership to transform my work into something meaningful. The meeting continued with budget reviews and operational updates, but I heard none of it. My mind was processing the systematic nature of what had just occurred. This wasn't a sudden decision or an impulsive power grab. Someone had planned this transition carefully, waiting until the project was ready for its highest profile moment before executing a complete leadership change. After the meeting, I tried to approach Charlotte directly, hoping to establish some kind of working relationship or at least understand her background in renewable energy. She was surrounded by a cluster of mid-level executives offering congratulations and expressing enthusiasm for working with her, but I waited patiently for an opening. Charlotte, I was hoping we could schedule some time to review the technical specification. The Titanium Corp presentation includes some complex energy distribution models that might benefit from detailed discussion. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing a flash of annoyance before returning to practiced pleasantness. That's very thoughtful, Alina, but I prefer to approach these presentations with fresh eyes. Sometimes too much technical detail can obscure the bigger picture. Fresh eye. She was essentially telling me that my expertise was a liability, that understanding the technology would somehow interfere with presenting it effectively. I understand the value of clear communication, I replied carefully, but Titanium Corp's technical team will expect specific answers about transmission efficiency, grid integration protocols, and regulatory compliance framework. These aren't optional details, they're fundamental to the system's viability. Charlotte's smile never wavered, but her voice took on a subtle edge. Alina, I appreciate your dedication to the technical aspects, but successful business development requires looking beyond engineering specifications. Titanium Corp is investing in vision and leadership, not just technology. The condescension was so complete it was almost artistic. She was simultaneously dismissing my technical knowledge and implying that business success required ignoring the very details that made the project possible. It was like telling a surgeon that successful operations required looking beyond anatomy. The vision and the technology are inseparable, I said, making one final attempt to bridge the gap between her confidence and reality. The North American Solar Grid Initiative works because the engineering solutions address real-world limitations that have prevented this kind of integration before. Without understanding those solutions, it's impossible to explain why our approach succeeds where others have failed. For a moment, Charlotte's mask slipped entirely, revealing something cold and dismissive underneath the polished exterior. Alina, I think you're overthinking this. How complicated can it really be? Solar panels generate electricity, we connect them together and customers buy the power. The details will work themselves out. The simplification was so profound it rendered 4 years of work meaningless. Solar panels generate electricity, we connect them together. She'd reduced a revolutionary energy distribution system to the level of a child's science fair project. But more disturbing than her ignorance was her confidence that ignorance didn't matter. I stood there speechless as she gathered her things and headed toward the elevator, already moving on to more important matter. The conversation had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it revealed everything I needed to know about Charlotte Martinez Webb. She wasn't just taking credit for my work, She genuinely believed that expertise was optional, that leadership meant never having to understand the things you were leading. That afternoon, I received an email from HR scheduling a transition meeting for the following week. The subject line was role adjustment discussion, but the timing made the purpose clear. They were waiting until after the Titanium Corp presentation to formally remove me from the project, probably hoping I'd accept the change gracefully once Charlotte's success became apparent. But I knew something they didn't understand yet. Complex engineering systems don't respond well to ignorance, no matter how confidently that ignorance is presented. The North American Solar Grid Initiative worked because every component had been designed to interact with every other component in precisely calculated ways. Charlotte Martinez Webb was about to discover that solar grids, unlike corporate hierarchies, don't care about family connection. I spent that evening walking through the empty lab where I'd solved the transmission efficiency problem, past the whiteboard still covered with equations that Charlotte would never understand, past the prototype hardware that represented thousands of hours of trial and error. Tomorrow she would stand in front of Titanium Corp's executives and present my life's work as her own achievement. But presentations, like solar grids, require more than confidence to succeed. They require understanding the technology you're claiming to have created. And Charlotte Martinez Webb was about to learn that some kinds of knowledge can't be inherited, transferred, or faked. The foundation I'd built was about to be tested by someone who didn't even understand what foundations were. The revelation came at 2:17 a.m., 3 hours before Charlotte's presentation to Titanium Corp, when my secure access to the grid monitoring systems triggered an automated alert I'd programmed years earlier. I'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, replaying every moment of corporate betrayal when my phone buzzed with a notification that changed everything. Critical system anomaly, unauthorized configuration changes detected in primary grid control protocol. My blood went cold. I grabbed my laptop and logged into the monitoring dashboard, fingers flying across the keyboard with muscle memory built from countless midnight troubleshooting sessions. What I found was worse than sabotage. It was incompetence so profound it bordered on corporate vandalism. Someone had attempted to modify the core routing algorithms without understanding their purpose. The transmission efficiency protocols I'd spent 18 months perfecting had been simplified to remove what Charlotte's team apparently considered unnecessary complexity. Load balancing safeguards that prevented system overloads had been disabled because they created confusing display data during presentations. But the most catastrophic change was to the geographic authentication system, the digital equivalent of cutting the brake lines on a freight train. Every solar installation in the network was programmed to verify its physical location before accepting power routing commands, a safeguard that prevented catastrophic misrouting of electrical current. Someone had labeled this feature presentation unfriendly and attempted to bypass it entirely. I scrolled through the changelogs, each entry stamped with Charlotte's executive credentials, but clearly implemented by someone who understood neither the technology nor the consequences. They'd tried to make the system more SHA-friendly for demonstration purposes, apparently unaware that user-friendly modifications to industrial power grids tend to result in spectacular failures. The irony was breathtaking. In trying to make my system easier to present, they'd made it impossible to operate safely. The North American Solar Grid Initiative was now a $2.1 billion accident waiting to happen, scheduled to demonstrate its catastrophic flaws in front of Titanium Corp's most senior executives in less than 3 hours. For 30 minutes, I sat in the blue glow of my laptop screen, watching error cascades ripple through subsystems that had never been designed to function with their safety protocols disabled. The mathematical elegance I'd spent years perfecting was dissolving into chaos, and Charlotte Martinez Webb had no idea she was about to present a technological disaster as her greatest achievement. That's when the victim mentality fell away like old skin. I wasn't just watching my work being destroyed, I was watching the people who'd stolen it prepare to humiliate themselves with stolen goods they couldn't possibly understand. The betrayal still stung, but beneath the pain, something cold and calculating began to emerge. They'd given me front row seats to their own destruction, and they didn't even realize the show was starting. I opened a new terminal window and began exploring the full scope of their modifications. Each change revealed another layer of fundamental misunderstanding, like watching someone disassemble a Swiss watch with a sledgehammer while insisting they were improving the design. The routing protocols had been reduced to linear pathways that would bottleneck energy flow within minutes of activation. The load balancing systems had been replaced with static distribution models that ignored real-time demand fluctuation. Most critically, the fail-safe shutdown procedures had been disabled entirely because they interfered with continuous operation demonstration. Charlotte's team had essentially removed every safety feature that made the grid functional, like taking the steering wheel off a car because it blocked the view of the speedometer. The system would start normally, run for approximately 12 minutes, and then experience what engineers euphemistically call total cascading failure, a polite term for explosive self-destruction. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face as the implications became clear. They weren't just going to fail, they were going to fail spectacularly, publicly, and permanently. The very modifications they'd made to ensure a successful presentation guaranteed the opposite outcome. But I had advantages they couldn't possibly anticipate. First, I still retained diagnostic access to the monitoring systems, a legacy permission from my role as lead architect that hadn't been revoked in their hasty transition. I could see everything happening in real time while they remained blind to the approaching disaster. Second, I understood every component of the system they'd broken. The error messages that would seem cryptic to Charlotte's team were like a familiar language to me. I could predict not just that failure would occur, but exactly how it would unfold, minute by minute. Third, and most importantly, I had something they'd never possessed: the respect and trust of the people who actually operated these systems. The engineers at solar installations across North America knew my voice, trusted my expertise, and would listen when I called with concerns about system safety. I opened my contacts list and found Marcus Chen's number in Vancouver. If anyone would understand the gravity of what was about to happen, it was Marcus, a 20-year veteran of power grid operations, who'd helped me design the original safety protocols. "Elena, Jesus, it's almost 3 a.m. What's wrong?" His voice was groggy but immediately alert when he recognized my number. "Marcus, I need you to look at the configuration changes pushed to your system in the last 6 hours," I said without preamble. "Someone has disabled your geographic authentication and load balancing protocol." I heard him moving, probably heading to his computer. Marcus had the kind of operational paranoia that made excellent engineers. He trusted people, but he verified everything independently. "What the hell?" His voice went sharp with concern. "Elena, these changes, this is insane. We can't operate without geo-auth. The routing algorithms will try to push 2.3 gigawatts through transmission lines rated for 800 megawatts. This isn't just system failure, this is infrastructure damage." "I know," I said quietly. "How long until you can isolate your installation from the network?" "Give me 40 minutes. "But Elena, what about the other installations? Phoenix, Austin, Denver, if they're all running modified protocols during the demonstration?" He didn't need to finish the sentence. We both understood that the North American Solar Grid Initiative was about to become a cautionary tale about what happens when corporate ambition meets engineering reality. "Marcus, I need you to do something that might seem unusual," I said carefully. "When the system starts experiencing failures this morning, I need you to document everything. Timestamps, error codes, voltage fluctuations, equipment readings, everything." There was a pause. Marcus was too experienced to ask why I needed that documentation, but smart enough to understand the implications. "Are you going to stop this?" he asked finally. "No," I replied, feeling the cold certainty settle in my chest. "I'm going to let them stop themselves." After hanging up with Marcus, I contacted Sofia Guerrero in Guadalajara and James Patterson in Phoenix. Both conversations followed similar patterns: initial disbelief, growing horror as they reviewed the configuration changes, and quiet agreement to isolate their systems before the morning demonstration. But I left 2 installations connected: a small facility in Nevada and a mid-sized installation in Texas, both with robust safety systems and experienced operators who could handle equipment shutdowns without risk to personnel. These would remain connected to the network during Charlotte's presentation, providing just enough data to make the demonstration seem legitimate, while ensuring the spectacular failure would be visible to everyone watching. By 4:30 a.m., I had assembled something Charlotte's team lacked entirely: a complete understanding of what was about to happen. The presentation would begin normally, with solar installations appearing to coordinate seamlessly across multiple time zones. Charlotte would speak confidently about revolutionary energy distribution, while graphs and charts displayed the kind of data that impressed executives who didn't understand the underlying technology. Then, approximately 12 minutes into the live demonstration, the simplified routing protocols would encounter their first major load fluctuation. Without proper balancing algorithms, the system would attempt to compensate by pushing excessive current through transmission lines, not designed to handle the overload. The Nevada installation would shut down automatically when their safety systems detected dangerous voltage level. The Texas facility would follow 60 seconds later. At that point, Charlotte would be standing in front of Titanium Corp executives, watching her revolutionary energy grid self-destruct in real time while having absolutely no idea why it was happening or how to stop. The beauty of the trap was its inevitability. I didn't need to sabotage anything or interfere with their systems. Their own modifications guaranteed failure, and their ignorance ensured they'd be helpless to prevent. They'd stolen my work, but they'd also inherited every consequence of not understanding what they'd stolen. I spent the remaining hours before dawn doing something I hadn't done in weeks: sleeping peacefully. For the first time since Charlotte Martinez Webb had clicked into my life on designer stilettos, I felt completely in control of the situation. When my alarm went off at 7 a.m., I dressed carefully in my best professional attire, not because I was attending the presentation, but because I wanted to look impeccable when the aftermath began. There would be emergency meetings, crisis management sessions, and very pointed questions about who actually understood the technology well enough to fix what had been broken. I arrived at the office 2 hours before the scheduled Titanium Corp presentation, and settled into my workspace with the same calm focus I'd felt during final exams in graduate school. Everything was prepared, every variable accounted for, every outcome predicted. Charlotte Martinez Webb was about to receive an education in the difference between confidence and competence, and the tuition was going to be expensive. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez. "Something feels wrong about this morning. The energy readings don't match our baseline model." I smiled and typed back, "Trust your instincts. Today is going to be very educational." At 8:45 a.m., I opened the monitoring dashboard one final time, watching as Charlotte's team ran their pre-presentation system checks. Every diagnostic came back green because they were only testing the components they understood, while the critical systems they'd broken remained outside their awareness. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, watching the countdown timer in the corner of my screen. In exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes, Charlotte Martinez Webb would discover that some kinds of expertise can't be faked, inherited, or bypassed through corporate politics. The North American Solar Grid Initiative was about to teach Titanium Corp, and everyone else in that conference room, the most expensive lesson in engineering humility ever delivered. The key to perfect revenge is making your enemies destroy themselves while believing they're winning. By 6 a.m., I had transformed my office into a command center that would have impressed military strategists. 3 monitors displayed real-time data from solar installations across the continent, encrypted communication channels connected me to allied engineers, and a carefully curated collection of documents sat ready to provide irrefutable evidence of what was about to unfold. But the most crucial preparation wasn't technological, it was psychological. I needed to position myself as the obvious solution to a crisis that hadn't happened yet, while ensuring that crisis would be so spectacular that corporate leadership would have no choice but to acknowledge their mistake. My first call was to Dr. Tricia Liu in Denver, the software architect whose routing algorithms formed the backbone of the grid's intelligence. Patricia had spent 3 years perfecting code that could optimize power distribution across 17 states in real time, and she'd been conspicuously absent from Charlotte's transition meeting. "Alina, thank God you called." Patricia's voice carried the strain of someone who'd been awake since midnight. I've been trying to reach someone at headquarters about the configuration change. The optimization protocols have been replaced with something that looks like it was written by a first-year computer science student. How bad is it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It's not just bad. It's mathematically impossible. They've created routing loops that will bounce power between installations without actually delivering it anywhere. The system will burn through gigawatts of energy while accomplishing nothing except generating heat and destroying equipment. I could hear Patricia typing furiously in the background, probably running simulations to quantify the disaster. Her analytical mind was the perfect complement to my strategic thinking. Together we could predict not just what would happen, but exactly when and how it would unfold. Patricia, I need you to create a comprehensive failure analysis, I said carefully. Timeline projections, equipment damage assessments, recovery procedures, everything Meridian will need when they realize they've broken a $2.1 billion system. There was a long pause. Patricia understood the implications immediately. I wasn't asking her to prevent the disaster, but to document it so thoroughly that blame would be impossible to deflect. You're going to let them crash the entire grid? She asked quietly. They've already crashed it, I replied. They just haven't turned it on yet. By 7:15 a.m., I had assembled what military commanders call actionable intelligence, detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities, intentions, and weaknesses that could be leveraged to achieve strategic objectives. Charlotte's team had made their modifications without consulting the original architects, without understanding the interconnected nature of the systems they were changing, and without any backup plans for failure recovery. More importantly, they'd scheduled their presentation during peak morning energy demand across the Eastern time zone, ensuring maximum stress on transmission systems. If they'd wanted to design the perfect storm for catastrophic failure, they couldn't have chosen a worse time to demonstrate their incompetence. I opened an encrypted chat with Miguel Santos, the regulatory specialist who'd helped navigate the international legal frameworks that made the grid possible. Miguel had connections throughout the energy regulatory community, and his insights would be crucial for managing the aftermath of what was coming. Miguel, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if a major energy provider experienced a complete system failure during a high-profile client demonstration? His response came back immediately: regulatory investigation, potential fines, mandatory safety audits, and probable suspension of operating licenses, pending a full technical review. Why, Elena, if something like that actually happened, the company would need immediate access to the original system architects to prove they could restore safe operations. Without that proof, regulators would shut down the entire network indefinitely. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Not only would Charlotte's failure be spectacular and public, but the regulatory consequences would ensure that Meridian couldn't simply ignore what had happened and move forward. They would need expertise they'd just dismissed, credibility they'd just destroyed, and technical knowledge they'd just proven they didn't possess. At 7:45 a.m., I received an unexpected visitor. Kevin Thompson, the transmission engineer whose designs handled power distribution across the continental network, knocked on my office door with the expression of someone carrying bad news. Elena, we need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him and activating the white noise generator I kept for sensitive conversations. I've been reviewing the morning's operational parameters, and we're about to have a crisis. Kevin was the most conservative engineer I'd ever worked with, a man who built safety margins into his safety margins, and triple-checked calculations that most people wouldn't question. If he was concerned about system stability, the situation was worse than even I had anticipated. Show me, I said, gesturing to the technical workstation where we'd solved countless engineering challenges over the past 4 years. He pulled up a transmission load analysis that made my blood run cold. The simplified routing protocols weren't just inefficient, they were actively dangerous. By removing the sophisticated load balancing algorithms, Charlotte's team had created a system that would attempt to push the entire grid's generating capacity through the highest voltage transmission lines simultaneously. Elena, when this system activates under load, we're not just talking about equipment failure, Kevin said quietly. We're talking about potential infrastructure damage that could take months to repair. Transmission towers, transformer stations, underground cables, Everything connected to the primary grid could be compromised. The scope of the impending disaster suddenly became clear. This wasn't just about embarrassing Charlotte or protecting my intellectual property, it was about preventing genuine infrastructure damage that could affect power supplies for millions of people. Kevin, how long would it take to isolate the most vulnerable component? He thought for a moment, running calculations in his head, with the speed that made him invaluable during crisis situations. If we start immediately, we could protect the critical transmission infrastructure within 6 hours, but that would mean completely shutting down the grid. Before the presentation, I felt the weight of ethical responsibility settling on my shoulders. Did I have the right to allow a preventable disaster simply to prove a point about corporate competence? Was my desire for vindication worth risking public safety? Then I remembered Charlotte's dismissive attitude toward technical expertise, her casual assumption that engineering details would work themselves out, and her complete indifference to the possibility that she might be wrong about things she didn't understand. Kevin, can you isolate the transmission infrastructure while leaving the solar installations themselves operational? I asked. Theoretically, yes. We could create isolated cells that demonstrate grid functionality without risking damage to the broader network. The presentation would still fail because the installations couldn't communicate with each other, but the failure would be contained. Perfect. Charlotte would still experience public humiliation when her revolutionary energy grid refused to function, but the consequences would be limited to professional embarrassment, rather than infrastructure damage. Do it, but Kevin, don't document the isolation procedures in any official channels. If anyone asks later, the modifications were implemented for routine maintenance purposes. He nodded, understanding immediately that we were entering the gray areas where engineering ethics met corporate politics. The isolation procedures would protect public safety while ensuring that blame for the demonstration failure landed exactly where it belonged. At 8:30 a.m., my final preparation involved creating what intelligence operatives call plausible deniability. I needed to be present during the presentation disaster without appearing to have anticipated or caused it. More importantly, I needed to position myself as the obvious person to consult when everything went wrong. I drafted an email to Richard Steinberg with the subject line "Technical Concerns Regarding Grid Modifications," and scheduled it to send automatically at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the Titanium Corp presentation began. The message outlined specific concerns about recent system changes, recommended immediate technical review, and offered my assistance in resolving any operational issues that might arise. The timing was crucial, early enough to demonstrate prescient technical judgment, but too late to actually prevent the disaster. When the system failed, corporate leadership would have documentary evidence that I'd anticipated the problems and offered solutions before they occurred. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Marcus Chen in Vancouver. Isolation complete. We're operational but disconnected from the main grid. Whatever happens this morning, it won't affect our infrastructure. Similar confirmations arrived from Patricia in Denver, Sophia in Guadalajara, and James in Phoenix. The most experienced engineers in the network had quietly protected their installations, while leaving just enough connectivity for Charlotte's demonstration to reveal its fundamental flaw. At 9:15 a.m., I performed one final check of my monitoring systems. Every dashboard showed normal operational parameters because the components being monitored were functioning exactly as designed. The problem wasn't with the individual solar installations, it was with the coordination protocols that Charlotte's team had simplified beyond recognition. I opened a secure video conference with my engineering allies, creating a private commentary track for the public disaster we were about to witness. Patricia appeared on screen from her control room in Denver, surrounded by diagnostic equipment that would document every millisecond of the approaching failure. Kevin joined from his transmission monitoring station while Marcus and Sophia connected from their respective installations. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the assembled group, "we're about to witness the most expensive demonstration of why technical expertise matters in the history of renewable energy." Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Elena, I've run the failure simulations 47 times. They get spectacularly worse each time. How long until the total system collapses?" I asked. 11 minutes and 37 seconds after activation, Kevin replied with engineering precision, "give or take 15 seconds for random variable factor." I leaned back in my chair watching the clock tick toward 10 a.m., and the beginning of Charlotte Martinez Webb's very expensive education in the relationship between confidence and competence. In less than an hour, she would discover that some kinds of knowledge can't be inherited through family connections, faked through corporate authority, or bypassed through willful ignorance. The chessboard was set, the pieces were in position, and my opponents had no idea they were about to checkmate themselves. The Titanium Corp presentation began at exactly 10 a.m. in the Meridian Energy Solutions Executive Conference Room, a glass-walled space that overlooked the city's financial district. From my office 3 floors above, I had a perfect view of the gathering storm clouds, both meteorological and corporate, that would define the next hour of Charlotte Martinez Webb's career. Through my monitoring systems, I watched the final moments of normal operation across the North American solar grid. Green indicators pulsed steadily from installations in Phoenix, Austin, Vancouver, and Mexico City. Energy flowed through transmission lines, with the mathematical precision I'd spent 4 years perfecting. Load balancing algorithms optimized distribution patterns every 3.7 seconds. Everything functioned exactly as designed. In 60 seconds, Charlotte would activate the modified system, and that perfect harmony would dissolve into chaos. My encrypted video conference remained active, connecting me to the engineering team that understood what was about to happen. Patricia's screens in Denver showed routing algorithm diagnostics that painted an increasingly ominous picture. Kevin monitored transmission loads from Toronto, his expression growing more concerned with each passing minute. Marcus tracked power generation metrics from Vancouver, while Sophia observed cross-border energy flows from Guadalajara. "Elena, are you absolutely certain about this?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent her career preventing exactly the kind of disaster we were about to witness. "Once Charlotte activates those modified protocols, there's no elegant way to stop the cascade failure. She made the choice when she decided expertise was optional," I replied, watching the conference room below fill with Titanium Corp executives. "We're just documenting the consequences." At 10:02 a.m., my automatically scheduled email was delivered to Richard Steinberg's inbox, CCing the entire executive leadership team. The subject line, "Technical concerns regarding grid modifications," would seem remarkably prescient in about 8 minutes, when those concerns became a catastrophic reality. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see Charlotte standing confidently at the head of the table, her cream-colored blazer catching the morning light as she gestured toward a massive wall-mounted display. The Titanium Corp delegation occupied the right side of the room, 6 executives in navy suits, tablets open, expressions suggesting polite skepticism, mixed with cautious optimism. Rebecca Walsh, Titanium's chief technology officer, sat closest to the display, her body language indicating the kind of technical focus that would make Charlotte's upcoming performance particularly painful to watch. Richard Steinberg introduced Charlotte with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely convinced they were witnessing the future of renewable energy. His voice carried through the building's intercom system, allowing me to hear every word of corporate theater that preceded the technical catastrophe. "Titanium Corp has been seeking an energy partner capable of supporting your expanding manufacturing operations across 3 countries," Richard announced. "Charlotte Martinez Webb and our strategic development team have created exactly that solution, a revolutionary approach to solar energy distribution that will transform how industrial operations think about power infrastructure." Strategic development team. The euphemism for one unqualified person backed by other people's work stung less now that I knew how temporary that arrangement was about to become. Charlotte stepped forward with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been wrong about anything important. Her presentation began with broad statements about innovation, sustainability, and revolutionary thinking, the kind of corporate poetry that sounds impressive until you need actual results. "Traditional solar installations operate as isolated systems," she declared, clicking through slides I'd created months earlier. "What we've developed is true network integration, installations that communicate, collaborate, and optimize performance in real time across continental distance." At 10:06 a.m., she clicked the remote control that would activate the live demonstration. The wall display came alive with a continent-spanning map, showing solar installations as pulsing green dots connected by flowing lines of energy. For exactly 43 seconds, everything looked revolutionary. Power generation statistics updated in real time, transmission pathways showed optimal routing decisions, and load distribution graphs demonstrated the kind of efficiency that made billion-dollar contracts possible. Rebecca Walsh leaned forward, clearly impressed by the visual sophistication of what she was seeing. Other Titanium executives began taking notes, and I could see the kind of engaged body language that indicated genuine interest in a potential partnership. Charlotte basked in the positive attention, her confidence growing with each appreciative nod from the audience. She spoke about visionary leadership, next-generation thinking, and the importance of bold innovation in competitive markets. For those precious few seconds, she genuinely appeared to be the architect of something remarkable. Then the mathematics caught up with the marketing. At 10:06:43, the Nevada installation registered its first transmission overload warning, as Charlotte's simplified routing protocols attempted to push 8-to-1 through lines rated for 400 megawatts. The safety systems I'd designed responded exactly as intended, triggering a controlled shutdown that protected equipment from damage. On the wall display, the Nevada facility's green indicator turned yellow, then red, then went dark. Minor fluctuation, Charlotte said smoothly, apparently unaware that she was watching the first domino fall in a cascade failure that would destroy her credibility within the next 10 minutes. The system automatically compensates for individual installation variation, but compensation wasn't possible with the modified protocol. Instead of redistributing Nevada's load to other installations, the simplified algorithms attempted to route it through the next highest capacity transmission line, a connection between Phoenix and Denver that was already operating at 89. Patricia's voice crackled through my headphones. Elena, Phoenix is about to trip every circuit breaker they have. The system is trying to push 1.2 gigawatts through infrastructure designed for 800 megawatts maximum. On my monitoring screen, I watched real-time voltage readings spike into dangerous territory. The Phoenix installation's safety systems activated with the mechanical precision of equipment designed to protect itself from exactly this kind of assault. Circuit breakers opened, transmission connections severed, and another green dot disappeared from Charlotte's presentation display. Temporary grid adjustment, Charlotte announced, but her voice carried the first hint of uncertainty. Rebecca Walsh's expression had shifted from interested to concerned, and she was typing rapidly on her tablet, probably requesting technical clarification from her own engineering team. At 10:17, the Austin installation detected voltage irregularities that triggered its emergency shutdown protocols. The simplified routing algorithms designed to treat complex power distribution, like simple arithmetic, couldn't understand why installations kept disconnecting from the network. They responded by attempting to route even more power through the remaining connections. The Texas facility lasted 37 seconds before its safety systems forced a complete isolation from the grid. By 10:09 a.m., Charlotte was standing in front of Titanium Corp's most senior executives, watching her revolutionary energy network self-destruct in real time, while having absolutely no understanding of why it was happening or how to stop it. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties," she announced, her professional composure beginning to crack as red warning indicators multiplied across the display. "I'm sure our technical team can resolve these issues quickly." But there was no technical team present who understood the system well enough to diagnose the failures, let alone correct them. The engineers who could have explained what was happening had been systematically excluded from Charlotte's leadership transition. She was entirely alone with a crisis that demanded expertise she'd never bothered to acquire. Rebecca Walsh stood up, her expression now openly skeptical. "Miss Martinez-Webb, this appears to be a complete system failure, not minor technical difficulty. How exactly does your network handle load balancing when multiple installations go offline simultaneously?" The question exposed the fundamental gap in Charlotte's understanding. Load balancing wasn't just a feature of the system, it was the mathematical foundation that made distributed solar grids possible. Without sophisticated algorithms to manage power distribution in real time, the network became a very expensive way to destroy equipment. "The system redistributes power automatically," Charlotte replied, her confidence evaporating as she realized she couldn't explain the most basic operational principles of the technology she claimed to have developed. But how? Rebecca pressed. What algorithms determine redistribution patterns? How do you prevent cascade failures when transmission lines reach capacity? What safeguards exist to protect infrastructure during emergency shutdowns? Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again without producing any word. She was experiencing the nightmare scenario every imposter fears, being asked to explain something they've claimed to understand, but never actually learned. Meanwhile, my monitoring system showed the grid's death throes with clinical precision. The remaining installations in Mexico and Canada detected system instability and began initiating protective shutdowns. Load distribution patterns collapsed into chaos as simplified algorithms tried to solve equations they weren't designed to handle. Transmission lines that had carried power safely for months suddenly experienced voltage fluctuations that triggered automatic disconnections. At 10:11:23, exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds after activation, the last installation dropped offline. Charlotte's revolutionary energy network had achieved total system failure in front of the most important audience of her career. The wall display went dark except for a single devastating message. Grid offline, technical intervention required. The conference room fell into the kind of silence that follows airplane crashes and stock market collapses. The stunned quiet of people processing the magnitude of what they've just witnessed. Rebecca Walsh closed her tablet with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid in the absolute stillness. "Miss Martinez-Webb," she said in the measured tone of someone choosing her words very carefully. "Titanium Corp requires energy partners who demonstrate both innovation and reliability. What we've just observed suggests fundamental problems with your system's basic operational capacity." Charlotte stood frozen at the front of the room, her laser pointer trembling in her hand like a conductor's baton after the orchestra had walked out mid-performance. The display that had shown her revolutionary technology now reflected her own horrified expression in its black surface. Richard Steinberg cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension like breaking glass. "Rebecca, I assure you this is an isolated incident. Our technical team will investigate immediately and provide a full explanation of what occurred." "Miss Steinberg," Rebecca replied with the kind of professional courtesy that precedes the cancellation of billion-dollar contracts, "I think it would be wise for us to postpone this discussion until you've resolved whatever fundamental issues exist with your technology platform." The Titanium Corp delegation began gathering their materials with the efficient movements of people who had seen enough. No handshakes, no promises to follow up, no polite expressions of continued interest. Just the quiet professionalism of executives removing themselves from what had clearly become an untenable business situation. As they filed out of the conference room, Charlotte remained standing at the front of the room, staring at the dark display as if she could bring it back to life through pure determination. But some kinds of failure can't be overcome through confidence, family connections, or wishful thinking. She had just learned that lesson in the most expensive way possible. It was the kind of quiet that follows explosions, not the absence of sound but the presence of shock so profound that even air molecules seemed afraid to move. From my office window, I watched the Titanium Corp executives emerge from the main entrance, their body language conveying everything about the meeting that had just concluded. No handshakes, no promises to reconnect, no polite corporate theater. Just 6 people in navy suits walking away from a $2.1 billion partnership with the purposeful stride of executives who had witnessed something professionally unrecoverable. My phone began ringing at 10:23 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after Charlotte's revolutionary energy grid had achieved total system failure. The caller ID showed Richard Steinberg's direct line, the emergency number reserved for genuine crises that required immediate executive attention. "Elena, thank God you're in the building." His voice carried the kind of barely controlled panic that corporate leaders try to hide, but never quite manage during genuine disasters. "We need you in conference room immediately. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with the grid demonstration." Technical difficulties. The euphemism was almost charming in its inadequacy. What they were experiencing was the complete vindication of every concern I'd raised about replacing technical expertise with family connections and wishful thinking. I'll be right there, I replied with the professional composure of someone who had anticipated this exact moment for weeks. I gathered the documentation I'd prepared, technical specifications, failure analysis reports, system restoration procedures, and most importantly, the time-stamped emails that proved I'd warned about potential problems before they occurred. Everything Meridian's leadership would need to understand both the scope of their mistake and the availability of an immediate solution. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like descending into a crisis management bunker. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the kind of organized chaos that follows corporate disaster. Executive assistants moved with urgent purpose, phones rang continuously, and hushed conversations suggested that news of the demonstration failure was spreading throughout the building faster than the company's carefully crafted messaging could contain it. Conference Room A had been transformed into a war room. Wall-mounted displays showed error messages from installations across the continent, while laptops displayed cascading system failures in real time. Richard Steinberg stood at the head of the table, his typically perfect appearance disheveled in ways that suggested he'd been running his hands through his hair for the past 10 minutes. Dr. Rodriguez sat to his right, her expression combining technical concern with professional frustration. Charlotte occupied a chair near the window, staring at her hands with the vacant expression of someone processing the complete destruction of their credibility. "Elena, thank you for coming so quickly," Richard began, his voice carrying gratitude mixed with desperation. "We've experienced some unexpected issues with the grid integration protocols, and we need your expertise to understand what went wrong." Some unexpected issue. The systematic failure of every component they'd modified was being characterized as a surprise, despite the fact that I'd documented the inevitable consequences of their changes in emails they'd apparently never read. "I'd be happy to help," I replied, setting my leather portfolio on the conference table with the deliberate care of someone carrying solutions to problems they'd predicted. "But first, I need to understand the full scope of what occurred." Rodriguez leaned forward, clearly relieved to have someone in the room who understood the technical realities they were facing. "Elena, the entire network went offline during the live demonstration. Every installation from Vancouver to Mexico City experienced simultaneous disconnection. We've never seen failure patterns like this." I opened my portfolio and extracted a bound report titled, "North American Solar Grid Failure Analysis and Recovery Procedure." The document was comprehensive, professional, and most importantly dated 3 days earlier, proving that I'd anticipated exactly what had just occurred. "Actually, Rodriguez, these failure patterns are entirely predictable," I said, sliding copies of the report to each person around the table. Page 12 contains a detailed analysis of what happens when load balancing algorithms are simplified beyond functional capacity. Page 18 explains why removing geographic authentication protocols creates cascade failure vulnerabilities, and page 23 outlines the exact timeline we just witnessed. Richard's face went pale as he flipped through the report, realizing that every catastrophic failure had been documented before it occurred. "Elena, this analysis, it's remarkably detailed. How did you—" "Because I designed the original system," I interrupted gently. "I understand not just how it functions when operating correctly, but how it fails when critical components are modified by people who don't understand their purpose." Charlotte finally looked up from her hands, her expression combining embarrassment with dawning realization. For the first time since her arrival, she seemed to grasp that the technology she'd claimed to lead was more complex than she'd ever imagined. "Miss Rodriguez," she said quietly, "I apologize. I clearly underestimated the technical complexity of what we were attempting to demonstrate." The apology was gracious but irrelevant. Technical systems don't care about good intentions, and billion-dollar partnerships can't be restored through acknowledgments of insufficient preparation. The damage was comprehensive, public, and permanent. "Charlotte, the important thing now is restoring system functionality," Richard said, clearly hoping to move past blame assignment toward practical solutions. "Elena, how long would it take to bring the grid back online?" I had prepared for exactly this question, and my answer was calculated to demonstrate both the complexity of the task and my unique qualifications to accomplish it. With the current modified protocols, It's impossible. The system is designed with interdependent safeguards that can't function when key components have been disabled or simplified. Attempting to restart without proper load balancing would recreate today's failure within minutes. Then what do you recommend? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Complete restoration of the original protocols, followed by comprehensive testing to ensure system integrity. I replied. The process would require approximately 6 weeks, including coordination with installation operators across 3 countries, regulatory compliance verification, and full safety certification. 6 weeks to undo the damage caused by 6 days of overconfident modification. The mathematical elegance of the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Elena, would you be willing to lead that restoration process? Richard asked, and I could hear the implicit acknowledgement that his experiment with family-based leadership had been catastrophically unsuccessful. I'd be honored to help Meridian recover from this situation, I replied, but I think it's important to establish clear technical authority to prevent future modifications that could compromise system safety. What I was asking for, and what everyone in the room understood, was complete control over the technology I'd created. No more corporate interference, no more family connection appointments, no more marketing-driven modifications to engineering systems. Just professional competence applied to technical challenges by people qualified to understand both. Whatever authority you need, Richard said immediately. Elena, you built this system once. I'm confident you can rebuild it better than before. But rebuilding wasn't enough. The failure had created an opportunity for something more significant than simple restoration. A chance to expand the vision I'd originally conceived while ensuring that future leadership would be based on expertise rather than corporate politics. Actually, Richard, I have a broader proposal, I said, extracting another document from my portfolio. The grid failure exposed fundamental vulnerabilities that go beyond the recent modification. I believe we should use this opportunity to implement next-generation improvements that would make the system more resilient, more efficient, and more attractive to partners like Titanium Core. The document I presented outlined a comprehensive expansion of the North American Solar Grid Initiative, additional installations, improved transmission infrastructure, and most importantly, international partnerships that would extend the network into Central America and the Caribbean. It was ambitious, expensive, and exactly the kind of visionary thinking that separated revolutionary technology from incremental improvements. Dr. Rodriguez studied the proposal with growing excitement. Elena, this would create the largest integrated renewable energy network in the world. The environmental impact alone would be transformational. The technical complexity would require significant expansion of our engineering team, I continued. We'd need specialists in international grid integration, advanced material science, and predictive maintenance algorithms. Essentially, we'd be building a research and development operation that could export our expertise globally. Richard's expression shifted from crisis management to strategic thinking, as he realized that the morning's disaster could become the foundation for something much larger than what they'd lost. Elena, what kind of timeline are we looking at for this expansion? 18 months for the core infrastructure improvements, 3 years for full international integration, I replied, but the key advantage is that every component would be designed from the beginning to handle the kind of complexity that caused today's failure. We'd be building redundancy, resilience, and scalability into the fundamental architecture. Charlotte had been silent throughout this discussion, apparently processing the magnitude of what was being proposed. Finally, she spoke up with a question that surprised everyone in the room. Ms. Rodriguez, would there be opportunities for people like me to contribute to this project? I realize I have a lot to learn about the technical aspects, but I'd like to understand how engineering innovation translates into business development. The question revealed something I hadn't expected: genuine humility and a willingness to acknowledge her limitations. Charlotte wasn't asking for leadership or authority, she was asking to learn from people who understood things she did. Charlotte, there are always opportunities for people willing to start with fundamentals and work their way up to expertise, I replied carefully, but it would mean beginning with basic coursework in electrical engineering, power systems analysis, and regulatory compliance. The learning curve is steep, but the foundation is essential. She nodded, and for the first time since her arrival, I saw someone willing to earn rather than inherit her place in the organization. By 2 p.m., we had established the framework for what would become the most ambitious renewable energy project in North American history. The morning's failure had created political space for innovations that might have taken years to approve under normal circumstances. Regulatory agencies, energy companies, and international partners all understood that the status quo had proven inadequate, opening opportunities for transformational change. More importantly, the crisis had established clear technical authority based on demonstrated competence, rather than corporate hierarchy. I would lead the engineering team with complete autonomy over system design and implementation. Dr. Rodriguez would oversee regulatory compliance and international partnerships. Kevin Thompson would direct transmission infrastructure improvements, while Patricia Liu would develop next-generation routing algorithms. Charlotte would begin as a junior analyst in the business development department, working her way through technical training programs, while contributing to partnership negotiations, where her communication skills could be valuable without requiring expertise she hadn't yet developed. At 4:30 p.m., I stood in the same lab where I'd originally conceived the North American Solar Grid Initiative, surrounded by whiteboards covered with new equations and system diagrams, but this time I wasn't working alone. A team of engineers filled the space with the kind of collaborative energy that makes breakthrough innovation possible. Dr. Rodriguez joined me at the main whiteboard, where I was sketching transmission pathways for the Central American expansion. Elena, I want to apologize for what happened over the past few weeks. The decision to replace you was based on political considerations, rather than technical judgment, and the results speak for themselves. Dr. Rodriguez, the experience taught me something important, I replied. Technical expertise isn't just about solving engineering problems, it's about protecting the integrity of systems that other people depend on. Today's failure could have been much worse if we hadn't taken precautions to protect critical infrastructure. She nodded, understanding the broader implications of what had occurred. Elena, what you've built here isn't just a renewable energy network, it's a demonstration that competence matters more than connections, that expertise can't be inherited or transferred through corporate announcement. As the sun set over the city, casting geometric shadows through the lab windows, I realized that the morning's disaster had become the foundation for something unprecedented. Not just a larger solar grid, but a new model for how technical organizations could maintain the primacy of expertise, while remaining responsive to business reality. The North American Solar Grid Initiative would rise from the ashes of Charlotte's failed presentation, stronger, more resilient, and more ambitious than I'd ever originally envisioned. But more importantly, it would serve as a permanent reminder that some kinds of knowledge can't be stolen, inherited, or faked. They can only be earned through years of dedicated work, collaborative innovation, and the kind of professional integrity that values accuracy over authority. Charlotte Martinez Webb had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, proof that expertise matters, that complex systems require competent leadership, and that the future belongs to people who understand the difference between confidence and competence. The grid would be rebuilt, expanded, and revolutionized, and this time it would be protected by people who understood not just how it worked, but why it mattered. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.